Hello everybody, we're back with more Necromancer feedback, this time on the Pestilence set for build 45704, the latest build as I'm making this video, and I have one word for this set. Yes, we're getting there. It's amazing. Yes. This set is so much fun now because they're starting to strike the balance and because a couple items were changed to make it better. So first off, the 6-set bonus went from 1000% increased to 3000% increased damage on Bone Spear when you consume an empowered Bone Spear charge, which you're gaining from consuming corpses. They made it so, or rather they reverted back to it, so the 2-piece makes it so Corpse Lance is no longer a Corpse Fragment, it is a Corpse Lance, so it does get affected by your rune for Corpse Lance if you have Corpse Lance on your bar. Then they increased the damage significantly on the Bone Spear weapon. It used to be 150% max, now it's 450% max increased damage, but it still costs 40 essence rather than the 20 essence that Bone Spear normally costs, which is fairly insignificant. It makes no difference that it's there or not. On top of that, they changed Kreisbin Sentence, I believe is how you pronounce it, the ring, which is you deal increased damage to stunned enemies. It is now you deal 100% increased damage against slowed enemies, triple the bonus against enemies afflicted by any other type of controlling and parrying effect. So right now you're kind of seeing how it all comes together. You know, we're getting our consuming of the corpses going, so we're getting bone or corpse lances going out and doing damage, right? Corpse Lance has had a big boost in damage. It is now up from 900% increased damage to 1750% increased damage. So that is being affected. So you're consuming the corpses, you're throwing the Bone Spears out, or the Corpse Lances out rather. Then you're getting the Bone Spear charges, you're throwing your Bone Spear, and it's doing increased damage. It's all working really well together. And I've come up with a really fun build that you're seeing in the background. I'll explain it in a second, but just for generality's sake, the other things that were changed that are really important here for this build are the shoulders. The Corpse Lance shoulders have their damage increased with a max amount of stacks that you can get. It used to be 15 stacks, it's now 20 stacks max, and it's 30% increased damage for 3 seconds for each stack, which is pretty good. Then there are a couple other items which I find interesting because if you're using a generator, you're likely going to use bone spikes. So the two-handed weapon that afflicted bone spikes before, which was, or I guess affected, made it just so it generated additional essence, which is okay. It was pretty insignificant. Now it's every point of maximum essence increases your damage by 0.5%. Which I guess is okay. It's the max I could get it to was like 167% increased damage using a ton of max essence stuff. So it's not quite good enough yet. Even if it was at 1%, you're still looking at, okay, that's pretty good, but now it competes with other weapons. So yeah, I don't find it quite good enough in its current state, so I'm not using that one. And they also changed Dainty's Binding, which is the waist, the belt, which is just now straight up like good damage reduction, but I'm not using that either. In fact, what you see me running in the background is a generatorless build, and I'm using the new gloves. That means that my golem is shedding a corpse every second. That, in combination with Devouring Aura, means that I tend to not have any essence problems. The problem that I do run into, and I do face very often, is that the golem is mildly retarded, and he doesn't always attack, you know, upcoming targets. He attacks whatever was left behind, and he's just going to continue to attack that thing until you kind of move out of the range and he catches up, or you use Command Golem, which will throw him down wherever he's at, and then he'll start attacking the closest target. So I find that when he is lagging behind, I don't have any essence because he's too far behind. I have to go back and find those corpses and generate off of those. And then if he's too far ahead, I have to run into danger in order to generate off the corpses. That's the issue that I run into with this build most often, but it still works very, very well, especially when you kind of get used to how the golem interacts and how you'll have to move around enemies. So the idea is I don't use a generator. I use Devour with Devouring Aura to consume the corpses, which are shooting corpse fragments, which are doing, or rather corpse lances, which are doing the damage with the corpse lance, which is then actually getting buffed by the Johnstone. So they've changed the Johnstone amulet. It used to be that it kind of had a damage buff for a certain amount of time after using Land of the Dead based on how many corpses you consumed. Now it's each corpse consumed in Land of the Dead grants a stack of macabre knowledge, which increases the damage of Corpse Lance and Corpse Explosion by, I believe it's up to 200% damage it is, while outside of the Land of the Dead. So this actually has a max stack of 200, and it consumes the stack anytime you use Corpse Lance or Corpse Explosion outside Land of the Dead. But you can get 200% increased damage on them right off the bat. So with using Land of the Dead, which of course we are, in the background, I'm consuming corpses with Devour, and I'm also consuming all the corpses that my command golem is throwing down. So generally speaking, I have endless corpses, which was the issue with this set before, is when you get into higher greater rifts, you don't kill many things and you're having to rely on the cooldown of Land of the Dead. So you don't have enough corpses. It tended to be a better set for things that you could kill very quickly. So like speed farming. But even then, there were sets that were doing it better. So with the gloves working the way they are, Command Golem does work a lot better because he's just shedding corpses. You have corpses outside of Land of the Dead to be using. Plus, those corpses are actually, being used with the new Johnstone, which means that the Corpse Lances are doing additional damage. On top of that, my Corpse Lance rune that I'm using stuns the target for 3 seconds. Yes, that does have an effect that deteriorates over time. They will gain immunity to that, but it does come back fairly quickly. So you can kind of get the additional damage from that with using Cryspin's Sentence, which is the ring for the triple damage, 300% increased damage against stunned targets. You see that Bone Spear does a lot of damage when they are stunned, and I crit. It is crazy. The Bone Spear rune I'm running is not Teeth, which I have been running in the past. I just find that it doesn't do enough damage, the Teeth rune, even though I find it the coolest one. I'm using the Shatter rune, which makes it so when Bone Spear hits a target, it explodes and deals the damage to all targets around. It's okay. It's the best of the worst options. I'll talk more about Bone Spear in a bit. The way I'm doing my damage reduction is with Unity, and of course with the stacks on the 4-set bonus. So anytime you hit a target with Bone Spear, you gain 2% damage reduction up to a max of 50%. So you have 25 stacks that you're managing with that. And on top of that, I'm using Bone Armor. Bone Armor is just really good. I'm using the stun rune on it so I can kind of have a controlled stun effect in order to get a ton of burst damage out of Bone Spear. And in my cube, I'm using Scythe of the Cycle, which is just increasing my Bone Spear damage anytime I have Bone Armor up. So that ends up working out really well together. I am using Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac to bring down the cooldown of Land of the Dead, though I don't feel it's actually that necessary. So the way the set is playing, you're seeing it pretty easily in the background. No generator, using the golem to generate my corpses in order to generate essence. I'm using the passive, which is increasing, or it has a chance, it's like a 20% chance to have a health globe come out of a corpse that I consume, which I am using Reaper's Wraps, which has been a pretty consistent wrist piece for me to use on the Necromancer. It's been really nice for all of the builds. Generally speaking, I mean, some of them aren't so much. Like, I'm not really consuming a lot of corpses with the Rathma set, so I don't really use it with that. But every other set, it does work pretty well because you're using, like, Devouring Aura. And without the generator, I'm able to just, run around and spam Bone Spear because I actually do have an additional spot freed up not using a generator. I found that using the Shadow Hook, which is the one that increases the damage, or rather increases the generation of bone spikes and increases your damage based on max essence, that forces me to use bone spikes. But, Scythe of the Cycle forces me to use bone armor. So regardless of either item that I'm using there, I'm forced to put something on my bars. I would much rather have something that is giving me damage reduction, so bone armor is the one that I've chosen to go with there. So, you know, you have a couple options in weapons, but what I found is that the Shadow Hook is not a big enough damage bonus to grant or to be granted in the set. So I'm just not bothering with it. And not using a generator means I'm using Bone Spear more often, which is just a good thing if I'm using Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac, because then that reduces all my cooldowns, as you might expect. Being able to have Land of the Dead up more often is really, really good. It means that I have an endless set of stacks for the Johnstone. I find that when I'm on a roll, I don't ever run into any issues of not having Johnstone stacks, and I'm consuming enough corpses that I feel like it's worth having that, because, you know, that Corpse Lance is doing additional damage. And I find that if I were to switch out Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac, which I might do, I would probably switch it out for a Ring of Royal Grandeur and then use the shoulders. But when I get into higher greater rifts, I'm finding that I'm dying much easier. It's like, you see me doing a 70, but I can do much higher with that. I have the damage to do much higher than that. And if I wanted the damage reduction, I find that because I already have Command Golem on my bar, I may as well use the Golem Skin Breeches, the pants that give you 30% less damage while your Golem is active, and your Golem's doing additional damage, which that doesn't really matter much, but the 30% less damage while it's active is pretty good. So you have like a lot of different weird options going on, and I find that for the first time ever with this build, you have a lot of variety in the items you're taking. But most importantly, for the first time ever in this build, we have struck a balance. You see, in the first iteration of this set, the 2-set bonus felt like it was the king of the set. You know, throwing out all the Corpse Lances was the cool thing to do, and Bone Spear felt really weak. And in the second iteration of the set, you never really realized the Corpse Lances were ever going out. It didn't really have much of an effect at all. In this iteration of the set, I finally see that there is now a balance between the Bone Spear throwing and getting the empowered charges and doing the damage with that, and the interaction with Corpse Lance, especially when using the Corpse Lance rune for stunning the target for 3 seconds. Because finally it's working in harmony where I am having enough corpses to be consuming the corpses, to be gaining the effect of the stun from Corpse Lance, and that's doing a ton of damage on its own now, so now it feels like it's there and it's present, and that effect is actually useful because it's stunning the targets, so my Bone Spear, and the empowered Bone Spear, I should say, is doing its additional damage. So for the first time ever, this set is now working in harmony. You have the 2-set bonus that is actually useful, and you have the 6-set bonus, which is benefiting from the 2-set bonus, and together it is creating a really fun play style of having to consume the corpses, which is kind of the fantasy of the set, but also making sure that your Bone Spear is doing a ton of damage off of that. But my biggest feedback for this set still remains. It is that Bone Spear does not feel good to use. It's not that Bone Spear is bad. You see it doing a lot of damage in the background. It just doesn't feel fun to throw. And I've said it before, I believe it is because the effect on it does not feel like it's doing enough. The Bone Spear with Shatter Rune, which is the one I'm using in the background, does feel better than all of the other ones. Teeth, I think, feels the best, but it actually doesn't feel like it does any damage in comparison to the Shatter Rune. So I feel like now the dial has kind of turned in the direction of the Shatter Rune, and it does feel a lot better than the rest. But Teeth doesn't feel like it's doing anything anymore, which is unfortunate. And the rest of the runes, screw them. They actually literally feel useless. And to kind of piggyback off of a comment that was in a past video, which I found fantastic, and I iterated on it to actually get the point across, it's that it feels like you showed up for a metal concert expecting to use Bone Spear, and it was going to be awesome and rockin' and just rad. And instead, you show up to the metal concert, instead of throwing Bone Spear, you're throwing pillows around, and you're in a really awkward pillow fight with girls just want to have fun in the background as you're trying to use Bone Spear. It does not fit the playstyle. It does not fit what is going on screen with how badass everything else is. It just doesn't feel good to throw. It does literally feel like you're throwing pillows. Even with the Shadow Rune, which is the best one of them all, still doesn't feel that great. It does indeed actually feel like the animation should be more. I don't know why. It just, that's what it feels like. It feels to me that the animation is not enough. I don't know how to fix that. My suggestion for the other runes is maybe make the bone spear slightly wider. They did fix the tracking on the bone spear for the normal spears, not teeth, obviously. Teeth, it doesn't work the same way, but the normal spears that you're throwing that now tracks enemies a bit better. So you'll see that like moving enemies, you hit them more often, but that it feels better, but it doesn't feel like enough. I actually never really noticed it as much of an issue before. I mean, I guess it does feel better now in comparison, but yeah, it feels like the animation isn't there and the sound effect also isn't there. It just feels hollow. I think that's a good word for it. When you throw the bone spear, it feels hollow instead of feeling impactful. It feels like when you hit with the bone spear, it should feel like, you know, you're breaking bones, but instead it feels kind of like it's passing through a wind tunnel. You know, it doesn't feel good to throw, and that does hinder the enjoyment of the set, even though once again you're seeing that it can do quite a bit of damage, but the damage wasn't enough. And in my previous feedback, I said we were in a, you know, hurry up and wait situation where we just had to wait to see if the damage was buffed, if it felt any better. I can report the damage is better. Bone spear does not feel any better to throw. And then I guess the final thing with this set that I find super frustrating is that it has too much ramp. And what I mean by this is if you die, you are screwed. In fact, I should say if you died, you are boned, because that's a little bit more fitting with Bone Spear. Because you have that damage reduction on the 4 set, which means that when you hit an enemy, you gain 2% damage reduction, stacking up to 25 times, you get 50% damage reduction. The problem with that is if you die and you're on a Rift Guardian, you are totally boned for a while because you need to get that stack back up. On top of that, if you're using bone armor like I am, you have to stack those back up. On top of that, you have to get your empowered bone spear charges, which means you need to be consuming corpses, which means you do need to use command golem. So if you die, you have to hit Land of the Dead right away in order to get the bone spear doing damage, in order to throw more bone spears, in order to get the damage reduction. So you go into a nasty cycle of if you die, it's going to get worse and worse and worse for you, and it's really hard to catch back up. And you'll see in one of the footages here at the end of Rift Guardian, I just get wrecked, and then I have to go back and repair, and that doesn't help either, and I miss it by a couple seconds. Even though I have the damage to kill the freaking Rift Guardian, I don't have the damage reduction because I died to something stupid. That is not fun, and it is not good. It's terrible to play because of the ramp. If that ramp was gone, it would feel a lot better. But because that ramp is there, it's so frustrating, and I don't know any way to fix that. That's just my feelings on the situation. It's too frustrating. Even if I was using Golem Skin Breaches, which just by default gives me 30% damage reduction, it's still maybe not enough. What I could see potentially changing for higher Greater Rift builds is taking away my Corpse Lance on my bar, which is unfortunate because I feel like the interaction between the 2 set and 4 set is really good there. But taking that away, using Decrepify for the damage reduction, using Dainty's Binding for the damage reduction, and instead using Bone Armor for the stun. I feel like that might be an option there. Another potential option to get that stun damage in is to use Bone Spikes with the stun rune, which is like the first rune on it. But then you have to use the Shadow Hook, which isn't good enough yet. So there are like some little things there. Like if the damage was buffed on some of these stuff, you would find that you have way more options than before. You do definitely at the moment have way more options than you did previously. But the main feedback here is that Bone Spear still does not feel good to use. That needs to change. It's really kind of frustrating at this rate because it's like, I like this set, I don't like Bone Spear. Maybe Bone Spear just needs to be taken off of this set. You know, if you're not going to change Bone Spear, then take it off of this set and use something else. Because seriously, Bone Spear does not feel good to use. Secondly, the ramp on your damage reduction with this set does not work very well. It is so frustrating when you die. It is too punishing. And if it were less punishing, then maybe the ramp would be okay to have, but at this point, even with the 2% damage reduction per hit compared to the 1% it was before, it's still not good enough. that ramp is way too punishing. And everything else is working really well with this set. It's just those two big issues. You finish those, the set will be fan-freaking-tastic. It has a lot of options. Changing some of the items, such as the Shadow Hook, will work really well for it. And I could even see a potential for, I don't know if it's actually going to be a speed farm set or not with this in mind, but I do see a potential with using Corpse Explosion also on your bars and having that work as some form of additional damage bonus with the Johnstone and using that as an AoE damage. And I think that that might work really well too, but I haven't found a situation where it works well enough because you're already limited for space on your bars. Where the heck are you going to put Corpse Explosion? That's what I have to say. Yeah, it is a fun set though, and it is headed in the right direction. And yes, it feels really fun to use. Bone Spear needs some work. The ramp is too punishing. And with that being said, leave your comments into the comments below because I want to see what you guys come up with build-wise. I feel like we're headed in the right direction with this. Maybe finding the right build will make it really, really good. It's just at the moment, this was, you know, my thoughts with the limited time that I've had messing around with the set and kind of coming up with something that worked really, really well for me and potentially will work well or be really good with some items that I haven't considered. And I love reading the comments because you guys always inspire me on like little tiny changes for the builds or for even completely different builds, which is great. But, you know, leave your thoughts in the comments below because I do need to read those in order to leapfrog the ideas there. And we shall see you guys next time.